Welcome to the Horizons Forum. The topic for today's forum is Project 2025, a framework for the erosion of LGBTQ civil rights. My name is Francisco Bushtin. I am the Vice President of Grants, Programs, and Communications at Horizons Foundation. Horizons is the LGBT community foundation for the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area, with projects locally, nationally, and internationally. The interest and importance of what Project 2025 means for the civil and human rights of the LGBT community, women, and so many other groups, for the U.S. in general, is reflected by how many folks are joining us today, and also all the conversation that's happening, both in the media and in social media. So the first part of this forum, the discussion with our expert panelists, is being recorded. And then for the Q&A portion, we will stop the recording so we can engage in a community dialogue, real time. One more housekeeping item before we start. The following discussion is hosted by Horizons Foundation and is intended solely for informational purposes. It does not constitute a political endorsement by Horizons or by the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism of any candidates, parties, or political agendas. We encourage open dialogue and critical thinking. So it is my pleasure to introduce and share this space with 2 of the fiercest warriors, strategists, and critical thinkers that we have working in the human rights movement in the US and globally, Heidi Beirich and Wendy Vaya. Welcome. How did we start? Can one of you tell me a little bit about, or tell us, I know what you'll do, since you're one of our grantee partners. Can you tell us a little bit about the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism?
Well, first of all, thank you, Francisco, for such a kind introduction. And thanks to Horizons for supporting us and for today's forum. Wendy and I co-founded the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism in 2020. After working for a very long time at the Southern Poverty Law Center, battling hate and extremism. We are dedicated to protecting human rights and civil rights and democracy. And we have various things we do with our work. One part is tracking extremists like white supremacists and others. We also work to counter the effects of anti-LGBTQ plus groups. That's been sort of the core of our work for a very long time. And Project 2025, the discussion we're going to have, fits in that mold and also the protecting democracy mold. We also do work to reform tech company policies. Horizons has supported our work on getting conversion therapy off of platforms. And we advise on various policy issues from domestic terrorism to extremism in the military. I don't know if you want to add something, Wendy.
No, that's good. We're happy to answer any questions if anybody has any later on.
Great. And that's what I meant about some of the fiercest warriors that I know in this space. So when thinking about this discussion about Project 2025, I thought we can cover 4 main points before we move to the Q&A. First, I think it's important for all of us to have a working definition of what is Project 2025. Second, we'll talk a little bit about the implications for the LGBTQ community if it's enacted. The third point that we want to talk a little bit about who is really behind Project 2025. We know, right, of the Heritage Foundation, but definitely we want to unpack that a little. And then last, one question that we kept on getting through the registration was, what can we do? So we'll dive a little more into that. So let's start with the first part that there have been many definitions and talking points of where Project 2025 is and what is not. Can one of you share with us what is Project 2025 and who or what is the Heritage Foundation?
Sure, I'll take the lead. I was just going to pull up a couple slides we have on that exact topic. Give me 1 second. So slow at sharing my screen. Okay, so Project 2025 is, as Francisco just mentioned, a plan that was put together by the Heritage Foundation and more than 100 other far-right organizations, many of them anti-LGBTQ, but also of other extremist ilk. And it's a plan, a really long 900-plus page plan for what the next president should do. So it talks about how to strengthen the presidential administration, change staffing, and really the big thing here for us is it involves a whole lot of rolling back of rights for various communities. And these folks are very much influenced by Christian nationalism, which we'll get into in a little bit. It's also a somewhat hyperbolic document. There's a quote here on the slide about how the authors and supporters of Project 2025 are going to rescue the country from elite rule and woke cultural warriors. So I think that gives you a little bit of sense of what they're about. So the plan itself has a whole lot on policy. It has sections on what to do with every single part of the administration, whether it's Commerce Department, Health and Human Services, et cetera. And the anti-LGBTQ and anti-women aspects, which we'll talk about more in depth, are threaded throughout every section of this document. It also would have a great impact on people of color, how the government functions, it politicizes it. It's also important that Project 2025 represents a coming together of many factions of the far right to back a vision of America, a really scary vision of America. And then the whole document is all about implementing this stuff as quickly as possible, were the opportunity to arise. So just a few of the things that are in Project 2025. They're going to politicize the Department of Justice and the FBI. Those won't be independent agencies anymore. They're going to use them against their enemies and those who don't fall into the realm of basically pro-Christian nationalist attitudes. There are terrible aspects of this plan relating to climate change and the environment. I mean, basically, they won't do climate change. They want to end the Endangered Species Act. They plan to fire most of the civil service and replace it with a politicized body. So no longer apolitical, bureaucracy, basically, but civil servants that represent their views. It's almost like everybody would be a political appointee. They also want to curtail press freedom. They would gut NPR and PBS and Voice of America. They want to turn VOA actually into a propaganda outfit. There are devastating hardline immigration policies in here, including the plans for detention camps and roundups and using police to do these things, closing the Department of Education and completely warping the education system, and anything having to do with racial or gender equity would simply be stopped. So I don't know, Wendy, if you want to add a little bit to that.
The only thing that to add to it is that as we are describing some of the terrible things that Project 2025 seeks to achieve, that it's going to be impossible for us to cover every single thing and every detail. So just know that we'll be happy to answer detailed questions later on.
So thank you for that, and I agree. It's just it's just a huge document. A follow-up question before we go deeper into this conversation is what is it that can you provide a working definition of Christian nationalism and traditional family values, especially traditional family values, as is weaved throughout this document?
So in this document, you're right, it's weaved throughout it. The authors of this document, the Heritage Foundation, the ADF, the folks that have spearheaded it, believe that you cannot separate the United States from what they call its Christian founding. You simply, the definition of American that is not complete if you don't have a Christian underpinning to it. And what they want to do is make legislative policy decisions with the idea of a biblical worldview. And along with that, they want to expand Christian religious freedom rights so that they overtake or surpass everybody else's civil and human rights.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe this is when Mike Johnson was asked about his beliefs by a reporter, and he pointed to the Bible as the foundation for all of his beliefs. So a very conservative Christian worldview would dominate everything. And anything that fell outside of that would not have the same set of rights?
So, unfortunately or fortunately, the three of us have something in common, is that we all have read all 900 plus pages of Project 2025. And I just have to say that for me personally, Tolstoy's War and Peace had more hope and less doom than this document. And that was the Russian version. But that said, we talked about that, how sweeping Project 2025 is as a framework for implementation at the federal level. And I will facilitate Christian nationalism. There's definitely a lot to cover, especially, today we're focusing on the LGBT community, but there's especially a lot to cover on that. Can you give us some of the most egregious implications for the LGBT community that Project 2025 has?
Yeah, sure. We're going to share a slide. And while Heidi's pulling that slide up, I'll let you know that if it's not listed here, it is not because we don't wish to diminish any of the horrible things that they suggest in this plan. We wanted to hit the highlights, and again, we're very happy to answer more detailed questions. I think that one thing that people must understand is like what Francisco said earlier about Christian nationalism being weaved throughout the document. I mean, I don't know how somehow they managed to talk about it, in climate policy, but they did. But this entire document, anywhere there's editorialization, it is just sort of an aggressive effort to dehumanize the LGBTQ community. And they absolutely do not believe that LGBTQ people should have the same rights as everybody else. They believe that they have been put into a special category that is unwarranted, and that the left, people who support the community, are deviant. So, I mean, that's sort of the framework for what's behind some of their suggestions. But here you'll see defunding all gender-affirming healthcare. That means in any federal program, any hospital or whatever it is that gets federal money. When it comes to the military, I mean, we all remember what the fight to have LGBTQ people openly in the military. Well, now they sort of diminish LGBT people, and they want to eliminate trans people. Certainly do not want to provide them with any gender affirming care. Defunding schools with inclusive policies. And this means that in addition to that, that would mean K through 12 and higher ed. And they want to remove the civil rights afforded the LGBTQ students right now. They want to remove all of those. Then also remove all workplace protections for women and LGBTQ people. They believe it sort of suggests, the plan sort of suggests that if you are a woman or a member of a minority community in any way, then you probably got your job because of that. Therefore, your position should be reviewed. And then, they'll see if you're actually qualified to maintain that job. I mentioned extending the religious freedom rights. Right now, the groups behind this have won case after case that extends religious freedom rights, which sounds like it's okay because everybody, you in this country, you are allowed and encouraged to practice your religion as you see fit. The thing that's different here is that they want Christianity to be favored over all other religions. So in other words, the rights that are being extended are only for the Christian community. They want to change the tax code to favor traditional families. This goes to families with a male father and a female mother and their biological children. That's how they describe it. But what's scary about it is the economic incentives that they will either put in place, or the economic punishments they'll put in place if you are not a member of a family as they define it. And then, of course, the U.S. currently has a strong strong LGBTQ rights program in Africa and throughout the continent, and they want to take away all support for that.
And as Wendy and Heidi, as Wendy and Heidi kind of said, that's just a small list of a lot of things in there.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, it's shocking how many different aspects of this anti-LGBTQ plus agenda there is in this document. I would say women and the community are the two most targeted types of people in here. But of course, there's a lot of, anti-diversity, anti-equity, things that would impact other minority communities. But the stripping of rights from the LGBTQ community and from women is pretty incredible.
Yes, and I would go a step farther and say that it would be particularly hard on Black women. So just to show, so when we talk about the along those lines, let's add to that about how hard it would be on women. Obviously, reproductive rights and a woman's ability to make a decision about her own body is critical, and that's being taken away across the country. In my own state, I live in Alabama, and I'm sure you've heard all kinds of things about Alabama, like we had the IVF fight here. We just yesterday, of the 200 prosecutions for pregnant women, 100 of them came out of Alabama. So it is not just about abortion. It is about everything related to a woman's body and her ability to choose, up to IVF and contraception. So contraception they're going to go after it. And I don't mean like a mifepristone. I mean, they're going to make it very, very difficult for women to get contraception, up into things like no-fault divorce. I don't mean to sound hyperbolic here, but that is actually the plan. This is the agenda. And so I think there's another slide, Heidi, about mifepristone. Oh, excuse me. It's about, yes, biblically based marriages. As we said, the family they have a definition of the family. In addition to that, within that family, the male that is head of the family, the women should defer to him. He is the decision maker. He should go out and earn the salary while the woman stays home, on and on and on. But a woman has no ability to make a decision about her own body.
And that's the case that you were mentioning,
Yeah.
Wendy.
So mifepristone, I'm sure y'all know, it's one of the drugs that are used in medical or medication abortions. The ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, which we'll talk more about in a minute, brought the case. It was a very weak case, but it made it all the way to the Supreme Court. They brought the case saying that the FDA had no right to approve it. Now, this drug has been being used for like 25 years. So they're challenging the FDA's ability to approve it. And they brought the case based on a recently founded organization. We believe that the Alliance Defending Freedom and others founded it for this purpose, to be the plaintiff in the case, who were not themselves being forced to administer these drugs, because that is already illegal. They can already decline, but they brought it based on the fact that their colleagues might have to administer or might want to administer these drugs, and they would be harmed by it. So the Supreme Court declined. They declined to rule on the case, other than to say, we can't rule on it because the standing, meaning the group that said they were going to be harmed, had no right to bring it. So what that means is that the idea of whether or not the FDA can approve drugs, there's something else called the Comstock Act where it prevents medicines being sent through the mail. All of that is still on the table, and they most certainly are going to bring other cases. So it's to make it, sort of to broaden that out. If the Supreme Court were to find that the FDA didn't have the right to approve this case, which is their theory, that throws into chaos our entire drug approval system. So every single thing that they do has a ripple effect.
And definitely, and I know that some conversations have been had, like if that happens with this case, what's going to happen to PrEP and PEP? I mean, other type of medication that's FDA approved. We can go down a rabbit hole with that one. But, I think one thing in, your examples, the LGBTQ community examples and the women, it is, it's going after some of the most common principles that secure some of our rights and have propelled some of our rights for the LGBT community and women, both equality, body autonomy, social justice, privacy. It's those basic fundamental frameworks that have secured some of our rights. So they seem to know a lot about LGBT community and women. So let's talk a little bit about them. Who is really behind Project 2025? The Heritage Foundation. We know there's a host of organizations and actors. The list is exhaustive and exhausting at times, but surely definitely not new actors in this space. So can you highlight some of those organizations and their ongoing work?
Yeah, you're making a very important point about the fact that these are not new folks around the block, right? Christian nationalist groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Family Research Council, which are all involved in this effort, have been going after LGBTQ rights for a very long time, obviously against same-sex marriage. They all weighed in with amicus briefs in Lawrence back in the day. And the coalition behind this thing, these are some examples of groups who are involved, is made up of groups like CFAM, which is rabidly anti-LGBTQ. And their leader, Austin Ruse, at one point said on a radio show that liberals should be shot. He got in a little bit of trouble for that, but not as much as he deserved. But there are also groups like the Center for Immigration Studies, which is an anti-immigrant group. Its leader this week said that Haiti should be recolonized. Stephen Miller, the immigration advisor for Trump, his America First Legal was involved in this effort until recently. Moms for Liberty is an organization that's only been around for a little while. They've called for book banning for anything having to do with the LGBTQ plus experience. They're supporting book banning. It's kind of amazing. And then groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom, which I would say that the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Heritage Foundation, which has become more and more radical in since 2020, those are some of the big powerhouses behind this effort. So it's a whole lot of hate groups is what I really want to say on different fronts, whether it's denying rights to women, to LGBTQ community, to immigrants. It's a real scary group of folks. And I just want to say a little bit more about the Alliance Defending Freedom because it doesn't get the attention that it should in terms of how much terrible stuff that they have been able to accomplish through the courts. So Alliance Defending Freedom was involved in the case that overturned Roe. They've been working at this for decades. I already mentioned criminalization in the Lawrence decision. They filed an amicus brief in that case, a couple decades ago. They brought the recent cases both on Masterpiece Cake, right, which upended LGBTQ protections in Colorado, and the really absurd wedding website case where it turns out that their plaintiff was never even asked to make a wedding cake, which is just shocking to me that would make its way through the whole court system and all the way up to the Supreme Court. Of course, Wendy already talked about the mifepristone case. They have Alliance Defending Freedom has brought cases against gender-affirming care. They have defended conversion therapy providers in cases where there are bans, and that's not just here in the United States. Alliance Defending Freedom spends millions of dollars on these same efforts all across the world. And they are largely responsible for drafting all these horrible anti-trans and anti-LGBT bills that have been proliferating at the state level in recent years. So this is an organization that does nothing but cause trouble, in my view, and strip rights. And many people don't even know much about the Alliance Defending Freedom, so it's important to put a spotlight on them. And here's the kicker. They're not just powerful at the Supreme Court or internationally where they're pushing the same agenda. You know, Mike Johnson, our Speaker of the House, worked for the Alliance Defending Freedom. He also worked for their conversion therapy outfit, Exodus, for a while. So it just shows you how many ties to very, very powerful people Alliance Defending Freedom has, and many of the groups that are backing Project 2025 have ties like this. I'll just say one other thing. They also have a lot of resources. They're not going anywhere, whatever happens in November. Just one person, Leonard Leo, who is largely responsible for our Supreme Court, he got one donation. He has a bunch of different organizations, one donation worth $1.6 billion to pursue this agenda. So that gives you a sense of what we're talking about in terms of, you know, the wealth, the effort, the thinking, the long-termness of this project. It's not going away based on something that might happen in one election. This is something we're going to have to fight for the long term. And
is our ADF offices still in the strip mall, or they've upgraded they're starting in the strip mall? Remember, have they upgraded their offices out of the strip mall?
Arizona.
I think they're still in the strip mall in Scottsdale, but they have a DC office now.
Oh, okay.
And they have offices in Europe, so.
Yeah, definitely. So I know we've been very zero dark 30, right? This conversation, given Project 2025, but a lot of questions that we got was, you know, what can one do? So can you share very quickly what is it that your organization is doing when it comes to Project 2025?
Yeah, we have been focusing on Project 2025 since before people even really knew what it was. Like right after Heritage Foundation published the thing, we did an analysis of it and began getting the word out. And that's been one of our biggest challenges is getting the word out about this thing and letting people understand what it really means. We've done that through a number of ways. We've published, we do webinars, we talk to every single reporter, we talk to every community person that reaches out. But we also did this thing where we ran Google ads starting right at the beginning, which we're really pretty pleased with the results, because we started running the Google ads to let people know that Project 2025 wasn't just some innocuous sounding thing for the next presidential year. And we did it so heavily that we were able to beat out the Heritage Foundation itself, their ads. So in other words, if you Google Project 2025, you got our information first before you got the Heritage Foundation and other groups. We have advised and talked to many people on the Hill about the dangers of this plan. We're on a congressional task force with Representative Huffman, where we provide information and advise them. Additionally, we've talked to folks at the UN, at the EU, at the OAS. Just that's what we're doing.
No, and thank you for all that work. I would say similarly for Horizons Foundation, among some of the things we are doing, including this forum, is to inform people about Project 2025, our foundation partners, and also we continue to fund nonprofits like the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, as well as a lot of other grantee partners who have been working for years on advancing the rights of the LGBT community and women's rights, both locally, nationally, and internationally. So we as a foundation, we stick with our commitment. So I want to close the portion of this forum that's been recorded and move to a public discussion. But before we do that, I want to thank Heidi and Wendy for sharing with us a wealth of information and understanding about what may happen if Project 2025 is implemented. And yes, a brief closing thought before we stop recording. So look, we know that Project 2025 is a result of years, decades, probably even more, of work to prevent and erode LGBTQ rights, as well as women's rights, and many other communities, as you know, that are outlined in the document. But we also know that whether Project 2025 is implemented or not implemented, the organizations and individuals behind this are not going to stop. And they're going to continue to work at the local, city, county, and state, and even federal level, because they've been working at all those levels. Project 2025 is sort of a federal type blueprint. And regardless of the outcome of the upcoming elections, they're not going to stop. So in a way, it's a matter of degrees and speed of harm. But I just want to close with this, that is very important for us to never forget. And is that we all know the strength, perseverance, and fierceness of the LGBT community, of women, of our allies to work toward equality and justice for all.